In a dark room full of doors, a little dragon tries to run away. An old man comes after it to catch it, but when he turns around, he discovers another man locking the door to trap him there. The old man tosses a ball of magic at the guy, but nothing happens. Many years later, it's a normal morning in London, but Paul is already having trouble. He oversleeps, his shoelaces break, the toaster is damaged, and he has to rush all the way to the place where he'll be having a job interview. On his way there, a strange old man called Monty cuts into chit-chat, swearing he used to know Paul some time ago. Paul doesn't recognize him and ignores him for now, hurrying to get in line. At that moment, a small dog steals Paul's scarf, so he has to chase him down an alley. Suddenly he doesn't see the dog anymore, but there's a door that says applicants, so he decides to enter. Inside a room filled with weird stuff, he finds a woman named Sophie, who seems to also be waiting for the interview while watching TV. Paul sits next to her and fails to make conversation, so he watches the TV as well to discover he missed the intro to the company. He still doesn't know what the job is, only that the company is called Wells & Co. The brochure on the table isn't helpful either and only says feeling lucky. Suddenly, laughter echoes through the room, and Mr. Tanner comes in. He dismisses another applicant before telling Paul to follow him, somehow knowing his name without asking. They take the stairs to the main office, where the boss Wells is waiting with the other members of the board, Van Spey, Judy, and Casimir. They make him a bunch of strange questions and Paul answers the best he can, but he never stops feeling confused and awkward. He's also distracted by the cracks on the wallpaper, which he thinks looks like a map of London. The others can't see it, but Wells is impressed. Unfortunately, Tanner sends him away, saying they've heard enough. When Paul leaves the building, he finds the dog holding his scarf, almost as if the animal had been waiting. Moments later, Paul gets home and is upset to hear his roommate is moving out and an argument ensues since Paul can't pay the rent alone. Suddenly a strange claw pushes a letter through the mail slot and Paul rushes to grab it, shocked to see it comes from Wells when he never gave them his address. Even more surprising is the letter saying Paul has passed the interview, which makes him celebrate. The next day, Paul goes to work with a very positive attitude. The receptionist Rosie won't tell him what the job is about either, and after gifting him a mug, she calls for Tanner, who picks up Paul and takes him through different areas in the building as he explains they're a law firm and that computers aren't allowed in here. When they reach an area that is being fixed, Tanner weirdly gets worried about a stapler on the floor and makes Paul carefully walk around it, telling him not to panic. They continue to make their way through many weird offices, like one with a giant map and lots of telephones where Paul thinks he sees Monty. They also go through one with lots of typewriters and another one with a bunch of tubes, but Paul can't tell what they're doing and Tanner won't answer his questions. Eventually Tanner takes Paul to the innermost office, where Sophie is also waiting. The two of them are now in turns, and Tanner promises someone will bring them chores before leaving. Because of his nervousness, Paul keeps talking non-stop, but he's very awkward and Sophie isn't impressed. Suddenly a strange creature runs in the shadows, startling Paul out of his seat. He comes closer for a better look, he only sees a regular mouse. At that moment Rosie shows up and leaves them a bunch of maps, saying they must circle the locations containing bauxite deposits. Paul doesn't know what he is doing, but he still spends the whole morning with Sophie inspecting the maps. The duo pauses for lunchtime, and on their way downstairs, Sophie says she wants to have coffee, which is weird because moments ago she said she didn't like it. Then they bump into Judy, who brings them to a park. Suddenly, a sewer lid opens and a canister is thrown out, which Judy immediately picks up. Then she explains that the lady on the bench is reading Atonement, and when she reads about the character jumping into the fountain, Sophie needs to signal to her. Sophie can't help but ask how she can know where she's at in the book, so Judy tells her to stand in the bushes while she watches from afar. Sophie concentrates and to her shock, she finds herself seeing what the woman sees. As soon as the reader reaches the right part of the book, Sophie makes the signal, and Judy moves her finger, causing the man sitting by the fountain to suddenly fall into the water. The lady on the bench hurries over to check and a romantic relationship soon begins. Judy praises Sophie for doing a good job, explaining that the man's parents had spent a lot of money to arrange for their son to marry the lady on the bench, but doing this way makes them believe it was destiny. A confused Paul asks what's going on, and Judy explains that Sophie is a seer, meaning she has mind powers. Then Judy finally explains exactly what the company does. It turns out that most of Wells' employees are capable of magic. They're practical wizards who use their magic to serve the clients for money. Although Sophie's an intern, she already is on a completely different level from Paul, and Judy only takes Sophie with her. Paul returns to the attic office and has a sandwich while looking at the maps. When he moves his hand to brush off the breadcrumbs, he feels a strange sensation in his palm. Curious, he begins moving his hand above the map, feeling the weird sensation and realizing changes are happening on the paper. At that moment, Wells enters the office and tells Paul to look straight ahead while continuing to feel the map with his palm. A current suddenly hits Paul's fingers, pointing to the location containing bauxite deposits. It seems that Paul also has supernatural abilities that allow him to detect where certain objects are located. Excited about this turn of events, Wells takes Paul to his own office while crossing a room full of printers. He explains that the company is critically fighting for its survival and they need a diviner to help everyone get back on track. Wells thinks Paul could be that diviner. At the office, Tanner is waiting for them, and to get Paul on his side, Wells brings up Paul's irresponsible father, saying he totally understands how it feels. Wells' own father, the original company founder, forced his son to sign a contract selling his soul to control him forever. Wells understands Paul wants to prove himself, so he gives him an important job. Paul must find a portable door, but he can't tell anybody about this mission. Paul accepts, but before he can ask for clues or details, he's kicked out. Then Paul decides to search for the door in the company building floor by floor, touching every wall, window, and door to no avail. He's suddenly interrupted by Van Spey, whose magic hair moves on its own while she speaks. She chit-chats and comes across as very friendly, but when she mentions illegal magic, her hair spells beware. After Paul leaves, the door nearby camouflages into a wall. Later at home, Paul tries to sleep only to suddenly be awakened by Casimir. His ability consists of controlling dreams, which means this isn't actually real. He wants to know why Wells hired Paul, but Paul keeps the secret as promised. Annoyed, Casimir uses magic to start bending Paul's leg, to make his teeth fall out, and his ears to grow enormous. Although this is a dream, Paul's still terrified and can't help telling him the truth. Casimir explains that the portable door could open the Bank of the Dead and gets ready to leave. Paul for a moment thinks he's waking up, but this is still a dream and he's knocked down. The next day, Sophie comes to work to find Rosie giving kisses to a stapler. Meanwhile, Paul continues searching around the company building and sees the words Bank of the Dead with an arrow spelled on the floor with stapler fasteners. Following the arrow's direction, Paul goes downstairs, and his hands quickly react to the energy on the walls, revealing some amazing artwork. Eventually he finds a dimly lit basement and a roll-up door with a message saying goblins only. Paul opens the door anyway, but inside there's just an ordinary storeroom. Before he can inspect it thoroughly, Tanner shows up and kicks him out, saying he isn't allowed in there and advising Paul to quit before something horrible happens to him. In the meantime, Sophie continues to work with Judy, who keeps getting messages from the hands coming out of the sewers. Judy explains those hands belong to goblins, who have been working with wizards for years and are capable to watch humans undetected. For today's mission, Judy makes Sophie sign a lost pet in a store so the owner can reunite with her cousin in a few days. This lost dog turns out to be a picture of the dog with Paul's scarf. Back to Paul, he continues to search the building to no avail. When he returns to his office, he finds Tanner arguing with Sophie over some trouble with her contract. It's now time to go home, and on their way out, Sophie can't help stopping to eat a bunch of licorice even though she said before that she hated it. Suddenly she starts to feel disgusted, and Paul takes her to a pub to have a drink and cleanse her mouth. They chat for a while only to end in an argument about who is doing better at the office. The next day, Paul bumps into Casimir at work, but the man acts as if they're seeing each other for the first time since the interview. Afterward, Paul takes the stairs and bumps into Monty, who admits he distracted Paul on purpose the other day so he would take this company's interview instead of his original one. Monty doesn't want to let Paul pass, but the boy insists until he can return to the mysterious room he saw yesterday. Following the sensations on his hand, Paul discovers that the things inside are an illusion and he immediately crosses it, entering a different room filled with strange specimens and miscellaneous magic items. After playing around for a while, Paul finds a stapler on the floor and when he tries to touch it, he's pushed back. Using his powers, Paul tries again and discovers the spirit of a goblin inside the stapler. The creature points him in a specific direction before disappearing, and Paul concentrates his power on his hands, which finally allows him to bring the portable door out of hiding. Curious, Paul goes through the door, and the moment he closes it, the portable door turns into a towel and he appears in another section of the building. Paul hears voices coming from an office and peeks inside to discover Wells talking about Paul's father and the disappearance of the company's former boss. It's revealed that Wells is trafficking human souls and using the company's employees as test subjects. Once they sign a soul contract, they would completely lose their sense of self, and Wells' next target is Sophie, which explains the change in her taste lately. To make matters worse, the rest of the board members don't know about this, and everyone's badges have special surveillance devices on them. Paul realizes that he can't give the portable door to them, so he picks up the towel and after a few failed tries to use it, he reads the instructions on the label. By reciting a spell and the destination, one could teleport anywhere. To test it, Paul mentions the supermarket, and when he walks through he suddenly finds himself in the supermarket's freezer. Ignoring the weird looks he gets, Paul picks up the towel and returns to the company, where he bumps into Van Spey. She reminds him to come to her if he knows anything, but he ignores her and runs to his office. Once there, he immediately tears off Sophie's badge and throws it away as he explains what's going on, then he takes the towel out to prove his story. Paul mutters the spell to open the door, only to find himself in a strange space with countless portable doors on every surface. Sophie hears someone there asking for help, but Paul quickly pulls her out and rereads the label to learn he must state the destination before opening the door. He tries again and this time they manage to successfully make it to Paul's apartment. Sophie is excited by the possibilities behind such power and immediately begins dragging Paul to visit places all over the world. They go to Egypt and Alaska, surf in Jamaica, and even witness the aurora borealis. They still show up for work, and Sophie sees how the cousins reunite at the shop, making her proud that she's using her abilities for good. But whenever nobody is looking or they have breaks, they keep on traveling, and the more they spend time together the more they bond and grow closer. One afternoon, Paul tells Sophie he likes her at the beach. Sophie thinks she likes him too, but she had signed a soul contract, and she can't be sure if her feelings for Paul are genuine. Therefore, they agree to find and destroy the contract. The duo returns to the company through the portable door, and Paul barely manages to hide the towel right before Tanner walks in. However, he notices their clothes and the sand on the ground, quickly understanding what's happening. He demands Paul to return the door and leave the company forever if he doesn't want serious consequences. Then he leaves. Paul and Sophie start arguing over what to do and agree to come back later for her contract. After nightfall, the duo secretly sneaks back into the company building, but the portable door isn't capable of taking them to Wells' office and instead drops them in a printer room. The printers are operating on their own, printing contracts for gym memberships, rental agreements, and more. It turns out Wells has secretly added soul agreements to these everyday contracts in order to make people unwittingly accept to sell their souls. Then they hear some noises, and after seeing a stapler on the floor, they follow the noises and moving shadows into the map room, where papers are flying and small fires are burning. There's some creature in the shadows eating a pizza, so a scared Paul opens the portable door to try to go to Wells' office again, but the door sends them to a dark basement with Bank of the Dead marked on the floor. After finding a contract that confirms they're stealing souls, the duo begins hearing noises again and decides to leave through a very creepy tunnel. At the end of this tunnel, they stumble upon a group of goblins. Panicking, they run away and end up behind the goblins' only door, where Tanner suddenly shows up. It turns out he's a shape-shifting goblin and the leader of the goblin clan. As he scolds them for not listening to his warnings, Wells shows up as well. Wells orders Tanner and his goblins to get lost, but Tanner refuses, claiming that without the goblins' assistance, the wizards are useless. An argument ensues, and Wells uses his magic to transform a bunch of goblins into office supplies. Paul and Sophie take the opportunity to open the portable door to escape, however they overlooked a rule: whoever closes the door owns it, and as a result, Wells jumps on it to reclaim control. Now the duo is trapped in the space with all the doors, and suddenly they hear a voice. It's Wells Sr. It's revealed that years ago, Wells lured his father to this place using a baby dragon, trapped him here, and then took over the company. Paul remembers Wells Sr. has a contract that should allow him to control his son. However, the man explains he can't use it because the soul contract must be deposited in the Bank of the Dead for it to take effect. Thinking they still have a chance, Paul begins looking for an exit, but there are doors everywhere. Wells Sr. says he has already tried and that all doors lead to emptiness. However, Paul concentrates on using his powers and after lots of effort, he finally finds the exit. They come out on the streets, and an excited Wells Sr. takes them back to the company, where he begins making plans. He asks Paul to take Wells' contract to the bank while he goes to confront his evil son and Rosie goes to pick up her husband. The group rushes downstairs, where the goblins are moving all the soul contracts away. Wells Sr. immediately finds his son to begin a fierce battle during which they exchange dozens of magic attacks, destroying the room around them and causing the goblins to panic. As magic energy flies all over the place, Paul and Sophie try to sneak around to retrieve the door, but Paul is knocked down and captured by a group of goblins. Sophie uses her powers to try to contact Judy for help, however the goblins charge at her. Paul is desperate to save Sophie and fences off the goblins, only to get caught in a net. At that moment, Rosie arrives with a stapler and throws it at Wells Sr., who uses his magic to hit the stapler and reveal a goblin that had been trapped inside. Then Rosie reveals her true form is also a goblin and she rushes to meet with the recently released guy, explaining the two of them are Tanner's parents. While the family has a touching moment, Wells takes the opportunity to launch a surprise attack on his father and traps him again. Paul tries to jump on him, but Wells' magic is fast and hits him away. At that moment the other board members finally arrive at the scene and try to stop Wells, but he keeps them away by threatening to kill his dad. Then he traps Sophie with his magic, asking Paul to hand over his soul contract in exchange for her life. Suddenly Sophie telepathically communicates with Paul, telling him that he could use his powers to create portal doors from zero. Paul concentrates and reaches out his hand, causing several doors to appear in front of him. He summons one of them under his feet and jumps right into the death bank, where he immediately hands Wells' soul contract to an employee as he asks for a special trade. The moment the employee retrieves the signer's soul, Wells' powers immediately disappear, which allowed Wells Sr. to trap his evil son with magic while Sophie takes back the towel to open the door to the dark room. Then Wells Sr. locks his son inside as payback for what he went through the last few years. Afterward, Wells Sr. tears off the towel's usage instructions, saying that the door would never open again. Sophie is worried about Paul, but he comes back with his own powers, and he hands Sophie her own contract, which he got in exchange for Wells. As everyone celebrates, the duo finally kisses. Then Paul grabs the towel and tosses it inside a laundry truck so nobody can gain access to it again. In the end, the board has a meeting with Sophie and Paul to offer them permanent jobs. They both accept, and using her telepathy, Sophie tells Paul that her feelings are real, so they hold hands. Meanwhile, the towel makes it to a hotel, where a maid accidentally says the spell. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.